Hey, my name is Melissa, and these are my favorite books of 2020, as well as some that just did not meet the mark or not for me, but I had such high hopes for them. I'm gonna start off with the ones that I don't have right now. They were library books, and then I'm gonna be alternating between a favorite, a not so favorite. Here we go. The first one is Where We Come From. This book was one of my favorite reads of the whole year, and it was one of the first ones I read in 2020. It's about a middle-aged Mexican woman, and she lives in Texas, and she somehow gets roped into smuggling immigrants, as one casually gets roped into that. And the shack behind her house is like this checkpoint, and it's housing immigrants as they make their way up north. Um, and somehow, don't want to give it away, she ends up having one of the immigrant boys staying way longer than way longer than all the other immigrants, and she's just housing him there. And it's a secret. No one knows, obviously, because it's very illegal. Um, at the same time, her grandnephew comes down to visit, and he's staying the summer. And he figures out that there's a young boy in the backyard. And the book follows their friendship that sparks. Yeah, and it's an unlikely friendship. They don't speak the same language, but it's very beautiful. I loved the way this author wrote. It was very different. It's in English, but there's pockets of Spanish. What I found that was really unique, though, was that he used the syntax of Spanish in quite a bit of his English parts, which just created this like new language system. It was really beautiful. I'd never read a book like that, and I really, really loved that book. The next book, this was not a fave. It's called Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, and I had really high hopes for this one because every time I heard of Riley Sager and her books, I don't know, it was always glowing reviews, super awesome, that they're like very eerie and creepy, and I was ready. And this was not it. So in Lock Every Door, there's this young woman. She has a new job where she's house sitting a very bougie apartment in a very rich apartment building in New York City. And as she's there, she's like uncovering secrets. Someone goes missing, a lot of spooky things, but she's so curious, she keeps diving deeper in, and weird things happen. So I was expecting a very big end. And it was building up to something, and then it fell flat at the end, and the reveal wasn't spooky enough or big enough for my taste. So I was very let down by that. I honestly probably wouldn't have finished reading it if it weren't for the fact that it was like April and we were in lockdown. So, not a fave. The last book that I read from the library was My Sister the Serial Killer. I loved this book. I recently finished reading it. It's a very short book, and it opens up with Ayola calling up her sister, Corday, to ask for her help in disposing of a body. This is her third victim, and we follow Corday, who's the protagonist, as she cleans up her sister's mess, both literally and figuratively, and deals with the guilt, while her sister kind of lives a very she lives like in the clouds, doesn't have to deal with the consequences, and we figure out whether or not ultimately they do have to deal with it, and how they, I don't want to give it away, how they deal with the aftermath of Ayola murdering people, because she likes to do that for fun. Okay, those are all of my library reads. Here we go. This one was not it for me. This one is called The Beauty in Breaking by Michelle Harper. This is a memoir. I don't tend to like to read memoirs, but I thought this was so interesting. I tried to go for it. In this book, we follow an ER doctor as she narrates the horrors of being an ER doctor, as well as the craziness in her personal life as she goes through a divorce at a very young age. And I was very intrigued, and the introduction is written in a very fast-paced, cool narrative style. And I thought I would really like it, but the rest of the book is not written that way at all. I also didn't really care for the narrator, or at least the writing style, so this was not it for me. I was very disappointed. I couldn't really get through that book. The next book that I loved was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This book was so beautiful. It follows these twin sisters who are somewhat white passing in the 1950s. They end up leaving their town and living off on their own. One day, one of the twins, she just leaves, vanishes. Her sister has no idea where she is. And from that point on, they're separated. The book then follows through 4 decades the lives of these two girls, or women. One of them lives like a white woman in America, and she ends up having a very opulent life. The other one lives as a black woman, and she goes back to where she came from. And we get to see how their lives run alongside one another, how they collide, how they fall farther apart. And we get to see multiple generations, which I love in a book. So this was a favorite. I spent many late nights just like consuming this book. I loved it so much. The next book I was disappointed in was The Death of Vivian Ojie. I had the highest of hopes for this book. It's set in Africa. We have a queer protagonist. It's a tragic, heartbreaking story, but I just couldn't get through it. So throughout this novel, we have this romance that goes on, but it's an incestual romance, and I just wasn't about it. I didn't like it, so I had to put it down. Maybe if I knew that would happen coming into the book, I wouldn't have been as thrown off by it. Maybe I'll read it again. I don't know. I'll try again. Who knows? The next book, which I loved this year, was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson, and I adore this author. I love this author so much. So as soon as this book came out, I got it. I didn't read what it was about. I knew I would love it, and I absolutely did. So this book is an intergenerational story where we mainly follow a mother and her 16-year-old daughter. We go back in time, we look forward. It's all over the place, and it's incredible. This is definitely one of those stories where it's not until the end where you see where all of the pieces land, but wow, it's beautiful. I loved it, and the writing is gorgeous. It's poetic. It's these like short like vignettes. It's incredible. I loved this book so much. The next book that was not all it for me was Lakewood by Megan Giddings. I again thought this would be one of my favorite books of this year. When I purchased it, I saw it being compared to Get Out, and I was like, absolutely, I'm reading the Get Out version of the movie, or the book version of the movie, but it's not that by any means, not at all. After reading it, I understand why they were compared, but they are not similar. Or at least not the same story. So in Lakewood, this young woman becomes part of like a science trial, science experiment thing, for money. And as the novel progresses, we see that there's a lot of shady things, a lot of creepy things happening. It definitely is eerie and at times gross. That was excellent in the book. My only thing is that about halfway through the book, not much happens. Things happen, but not at a pace that I thought that I appreciated, especially because in the last 30 or so pages, everything just goes like at super speed and like everything's perfectly solved and she figures out everything and it was just like it was not realistic enough, or it just seemed like the ending was rushed, especially when considering that a large majority of the book didn't really move. So that was that. I was disappointed in this book. It wasn't a horrible read by any means, but it just wasn't as great as what I thought it would be. The next book, which I loved, I did not think this would be a favorite, was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. First of all, this is like one of those floppy paperback books. It just feels like so perfect in your hands, but that's besides the point. I had to read this book for a class, and I probably would have not finished it if it weren't assigned reading, but I'm so glad I did. There's a lot of world building in this book. It's a dystopian sci-fi novel. What was throwing me off at the beginning when I was reading it is that you're learning about this world as you're reading and learning about the characters, and there's just so much you don't know, so it's a little hard to like find your footing at first. But I loved this book, so I won't say too much, but there's 3 perspectives as you're moving through the book. The first one is a mother who's searching for her child who's been murdered for being an Ojie, and an Ojie are these people who have the ability to control like the earth, in terms of like they can make natural disasters. So the people in this world are very scared of them. They have a lot of biases towards them, and they don't even consider them people. So her son is murdered. She's looking for her other child, and we follow her on her odyssey. The second perspective is a little girl who's an Ojie, and she's being sent to the fulcrum by her parents. And the fulcrum is essentially like concentration camps for the Ojies. The third perspective is a young woman who lived her life in the fulcrum, and we get to see her now being used like a weapon, as a tool by the fulcrum. It's incredible. I will be reading book 2 and 3, and I loved it. I didn't think I would. Okay, last disappointing read was Leave the World Behind. I thought this would be a mystery about intruders and creepy things that happen when you open the door to strangers, but that's not what this is about at all. It's a lot about paranoia and being stuck in a home where you don't know what's happening in the outside world. These people, they lose their Wi-Fi, they lose their cable service, they lose their connection while they're on vacation in a rental home. The owners of this rental home come back and they inform them that something horrible has happened back in the city. And a lot of, well, essentially all of the book takes place inside of this vacation home as the people are like ruminating on their, on what could possibly be happening back home, back in the city. I liked this book, but it was definitely sold as a mystery or something that you could piece together, or at least that was the impression I got. And I also thought there would be a lot more mystery around these people who claim this is their home and they're complete strangers to you, and there are potential dangers that come when you open the door. Not that at all. I also felt like this was way too long for this story. It's about like 250 pages, but really this felt like it should have been a short story, at max a novella. 100 pages was more than enough to tell this story. So yeah, not a horrible read again, but just completely different from what I thought it would be. The final book was one of my favorites this year. I love this book so much. This is One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. And in this book, first of all, this is a romance. I do not tend to read romance novels, but wow. This was so fun, so girly. It was perfection. So in this book, we have a plus size lead, and she is a fashion blogger, and she's watching The Main Squeeze, which is a play on, or like a satire of The Bachelor, The Bachelorette. She's watching, and she's like tweeting about the show, and she calls them out for like always having very model-esque, very skinny, waspy leads. And a lot, her tweet goes viral, and she has a lot of hate for it, a lot of people supporting her, and essentially the producers of The Main Squeeze, or like The Bachelorette, they contact her and they tell her, you know what, we would love for you to be the lead of our show. So then we follow her season. We follow different romances. There might be an ex-boyfriend who jumps on the scene. It's just so good. And I also really love that this book is told through multimedia. So we have like email receipts, we have tweets, we have magazine interviews, we have production notes from the show. It's really beautiful. It was really fun. And it came at the perfect time of quarantine, when I just needed something kind of juicy, kind of fun, and just like silly and light and girly. Loved this book. So those are all my favorite reads and all my disappointing reads of 2020. I hope that you liked this video and that maybe you found something fun you might want to read in 2021. That is all from me. I hope you have a very fabulous day. Bye!